In the heart of London, a confrontation unfolded that would challenge centuries of tradition and leave an entire crowd speechless. A decorated veteran hurled bitter words at a young royal guard, testing not just his patience, but the very soul of the uniform he wore. How did the guard respond? What happened next stunned everyone who witnessed it. Before we dive into this powerful story, comment below where you're watching from, like this video, and subscribe for more incredible moments of true character. In the golden haze of an early autumn morning, St. James's Palace stood proud against the shifting sky. Tourists from around the world flocked through its gates, their footsteps echoing softly across the ancient stones. Amidst the murmuring crowd, Nathan Clark stood at his post, a figure of absolute discipline and tradition. His scarlet tunic gleamed under the sunlight, and the ceremonial brass buttons on his chest reflected the heritage of centuries past. Nathan's tall bearskin cap framed his solemn, resolute face, while his polished boots remained rooted firmly on the cobblestones. In his white-gloved hands, the ceremonial rifle was held with the kind of precision that could only come from relentless training and unwavering respect for duty. Although his gaze seemed fixed straight ahead, Nathan absorbed every movement around him with the vigilance of a true sentry. For a moment, the bustling noise of the tourists faded, and all that remained was the silent testament to centuries of tradition carried on the shoulders of one man. It was a scene that spoke quietly to the enduring values of honor, discipline, and service, a living bridge between the past and the present, standing strong amid a world that seemed always eager to forget. Colonel Richard Ashford made his way into the courtyard with the deliberate steps of a man accustomed to commanding attention. Even at 73, his posture was impeccable, ramrod straight, a lifetime of military discipline etched into every movement. Dressed in a tweed jacket with polished Oxford shoes and a regimental tie, Ashford was a portrait of a bygone era, clinging tightly to the traditions and values he believed had once made Britain great. His sharp blue eyes surveyed the palace grounds with a mixture of nostalgia and critique, occasionally offering passing tourists bits of historical trivia about the royal guards and their centuries-old traditions. At first, Ashford's presence was welcomed. Tourists smiled politely, appreciating his knowledge and enthusiasm. But when his gaze landed upon Nathan Clark, the guard standing post with solemn dignity, Ashford's demeanor changed. A flicker of disapproval crossed his face, hardening quickly into something harsher. His cheerful commentary faltered mid-sentence, replaced by an uncomfortable silence as he stared at Nathan, struggling to reconcile the sight before him with his own ingrained notions of tradition. He resumed his walk, but now each step was heavy with judgment. His muttered remarks, barely audible at first, soon grew louder, tinged with the unmistakable resentment of a man who felt his world slipping away. Ashford was no longer simply a veteran admiring ceremony. He had become a relic struggling against the currents of a changing society. As he moved deliberately closer to Nathan's post, an air of unease began to settle over the courtyard. What had been a peaceful morning was about to descend into a confrontation that would challenge not only the dignity of one young guard, but the very soul of the traditions Colonel Ashford claimed to defend. As Colonel Richard Ashford circled Nathan Clark's post, his murmured criticisms grew louder and more pointed. What had begun as subtle disapproval now spilled over into open disdain, his voice carrying across the courtyard for all nearby to hear. His once respectful observations about tradition and ceremony had soured into bitter remarks about lineage, appearances, and the supposed erosion of standards. Ashford, a man molded by an era when rigid hierarchies were seldom questioned, could not accept the presence of a black guardsman standing vigil over the crown's most sacred traditions. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he declared to no one in particular, "There was a time when this post was reserved for the finest of Britain's bloodlines, proper men from proper families." His words, sharp and cutting, hung in the crisp autumn air, drawing concerned glances from passing tourists. Nathan, to his credit, remained immobile, his training unshaken, though the insults grew more explicit, referencing colonial pasts, racial stereotypes, and the dilution of tradition. He stood as an unyielding pillar of professionalism and dignity. Cameras were lowered, hushed whispers spread among the growing number of onlookers, many appalled at the aging officer's public tirade. Ignoring the increasingly uncomfortable atmosphere he created, Ashford pressed even closer, breaching the unwritten boundaries of respect accorded to the royal guard. His voice, once cultured and controlled, now trembled with righteous indignation. He spoke of family legacies, of preserving appearances, of how the great empires had been built on order. Words that no longer found sympathy among the modern diverse crowd gathered around him. When challenged gently by a few tourists to show respect, Ashford bristled with wounded pride. "I served Queen and country," he barked. "I know what standards mean." But it was clear to all watching that the standards he clung to had more to do with exclusion than excellence. His anger was not born of genuine concern for tradition, but of an unwillingness to accept that greatness could wear a different face than the one he had always known. As Ashford's tirade escalated toward outright humiliation, the question hung heavy in the air. Would Nathan Clark break his silence, or would he uphold the very dignity and honor that the uniform and the nation truly demanded of him? Nathan Clark remained motionless as Colonel Richard Ashford's words grew ever sharper, cutting through the air with the bitterness of a bygone era. Yet, even as the insults pressed harder, Nathan's posture never wavered. His white-gloved hands gripped his ceremonial rifle with perfect stillness. His gaze remained steadfastly forward, embodying a discipline that few could truly comprehend. He had been trained for precisely moments like this, moments when provocation, however personal or cruel, must be met with unwavering restraint. The principles drilled into him were clear. The uniform he wore symbolized not only loyalty to the crown, but the dignity of centuries of service. To react emotionally, to lower himself to Ashford's level, would be to dishonor that sacred tradition. A hush fell over the courtyard. What had once been a casual audience of tourists now resembled a congregation bearing witness to a test of character. Many watched with bated breath, some holding their cameras lowered at their sides, recording not a scandal, but a lesson in true strength. Even as Ashford moved closer, breaking ceremonial decorum, Nathan Clark refused to meet him with anger. His breathing remained steady, a quiet, practiced rhythm designed to master stress, a technique many soldiers in hostile territories had relied upon for survival. His every muscle was under control, despite the sting of injustice burning in his ears. It was a powerful silence, a more deafening than any retort could have been. In that moment, Nathan became more than a royal guard. He became the living embodiment of Britain's evolving tradition, one that no longer judged a soldier by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. Colonel Ashford's attempts to provoke a reaction only highlighted the contrast between the two men. Where the older man's posture sagged under the weight of prejudice and outdated pride, Nathan Clark stood tall, a figure carved from honor itself. The crowd sensed it instinctively, respect growing for the young guardsman who chose dignity over outrage. Before a single word was spoken, Nathan Clark had already delivered his answer. True strength is measured not by volume or anger, but by the quiet, unshakable force of restraint. At last, after what seemed like an eternity of tension, Nathan Clark made a single deliberate movement. His head turned precisely 90 degrees, his gaze locking firmly onto Colonel Richard Ashford. The motion was not hurried, nor was it aggressive. It was the measured, intentional act of a man who fully understood the gravity of his response. In a calm, steady voice that carried the authority of true dignity, Nathan addressed Ashford directly. "Sir," he began, "I believe we need to have a word." His tone was neither defiant nor submissive. It was the voice of a man rooted in knowledge, if yes, tradition, and self-respect. Without raising his voice, Nathan recounted a history that Ashford had not expected to hear. He spoke of his father, a British soldier who had once served under Ashford's own command in Aden. He detailed the heroism of his grandfather, who had fought alongside British troops in the dense jungles of Burma during the Second World War, saving the lives of his fellow soldiers without hesitation. Nathan's words were not boastful. They were delivered with the precision of a soldier reporting facts, clear, undeniable, and humbling. He explained that he himself had been born in Portsmouth, had graduated from the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, and had served honorably in multiple deployments before being chosen for the ceremonial duty of the Queen's Guard. "You see, sir," Nathan continued evenly, "the values you served, discipline, loyalty, courage, are not confined to one appearance, one bloodline, or one narrow view of Britain. They live on, stronger than ever, in all of us who wear this uniform with pride." Colonel Ashford stood frozen, his earlier arrogance dissolving into something closer to disbelief, and perhaps even shame. Around them, the crowd remained silent, utterly captivated by the quiet power of Nathan's words. It was not anger that won the moment, nor outrage. It was the weight of truth carried on the shoulders of a man who had earned all the right to stand where he stood, not by accident of birth, but through sacrifice, honor, and love of country. Nathan Clark had spoken not only for himself, but for a new Britain, a Britain that refused to let prejudice define its future. Colonel Richard Ashford stood in stunned silence, the full weight of Nathan Clark's words pressing against the walls of his long-held convictions. The fire of indignation that had fueled his earlier tirade now flickered uncertainly, reduced to a dim ember of confusion and regret. He looked at Nathan, not at the color of his skin, nor the uniform he wore, but at the man standing with unwavering dignity before him. For the first time in a long while, Ashford saw clearly. The traditions he had once revered were not diminished by change. They were strengthened by the courage and sacrifice of men like Nathan Clark, who carried them forward into a broader, more inclusive future. The young guardsman had not shouted, had not lashed out in anger. Instead, he had embodied the very principles of discipline, honor, and loyalty that Ashford claimed to defend. The colonel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His throat tightened under the strain of unspoken apologies. Around them, the assembled tourists watched, sensing that something far greater than a confrontation had just taken place. Ashford's rigid posture softened slightly, the proud tilt of his chin lowering in reluctant acknowledgement. "You wear it well, guardsman," he finally managed, his voice hoarse with emotion. It was not much, but it was something, a small surrender of prejudice to the greater cause of dignity. With a stiff nod, Colonel Ashford turned and walked away, his steps less certain than before, leaving behind a man who had honored not only the uniform, but the very ideals it was meant to represent. As Colonel Richard Ashford disappeared into the crowd, Nathan Clark returned silently to his post. His posture was once again perfect, rifle at the ready, eyes set forward, but the atmosphere around him had changed. A ripple of quiet admiration passed through the assembled tourists. Slowly, almost reverently, the courtyard erupted into applause. It was not the boisterous clapping of tourists celebrating a spectacle, but the respectful ovation of individuals recognizing true strength. In the crowd, an elderly veteran, himself no stranger to military service, raised his hand in a crisp salute, honoring the young guardsman who had carried the burden of centuries with grace and courage. Nathan did not respond visibly. It was not his place to acknowledge such tributes while on duty, yet there was no mistaking the shift in the hearts of those who had witnessed the encounter. They had seen that tradition is not preserved by exclusion, but by the quiet dignity of those willing to embody its best ideals. In that moment, under the autumn sun, Nathan Clark stood not just as a soldier, but as a symbol of a Britain that honored its past while welcoming its future with pride and integrity.